The sophomore album from the American singer-songwriter Frank Ocean sees the guy's highly anticipated return 4 years after his breakout album Channel Orange, a record that was very much loved by many outlets and hailed Ocean as one of this decade's brightest prospects in R&B and hip-hop. An album that tackled some very close issues to Ocean that really hadn't been explored or openly talked about in such an honest and upfront manner, and over the last year or so, everyone and their mothers have been clamouring for a new Frank Ocean record, and with a few pushbacks, we finally saw the release of Blond, an album that encompasses many of the previous record's themes, but unfortunately doesn't necessarily hit all of the targets in process. The large portion of this album deals heavily in the themes of love and relationships, referencing in particular moments in Frank's history, particularly in his previously failed relationships, the initial and prolonged heartache that came with these failures, and the feelings of sadness, pain and loneliness that go hand in hand with each other. Tracks that involve these emotions include Solo, which is about Frank confronting his loneliness, the initial fear and occurring struggles of facing life on his own without someone by his side and his search to remove himself from these feelings of solitude, and a brief mention should go out to Andre 3000 on the solo Reprise later on in the album for delivering an absolute stellar piece which carries on the same themes. Close to You shows Frank's apparent hurt over the ending of a relationship with someone who seems to be pretty blasé about the whole thing, showing no emotional devastation, anguish or empathy, unlike Frank himself, and the songs Ivy and Godspeed also handles the same topics, but both containing a fake glimpse of optimism in them. The first sees Frank reflecting on a former flame, and whilst highlighting that the two's relationship ended on a sour note, he's still thankful for having this person in his life, recognising that along the way he made some mistakes during their time together, but that he'll learn from these mistakes and aim to become a better person in the future. And the second track sees him letting go of someone, but despite ending things, he claims that he'll continue loving this person, but recognises that for the sake of both of them, Frank has to let this person go. Other tracks that are worth mentioning is the stellar White Ferrari, a song that encapsulates Frank's feelings of euphoria and elation of falling in love with someone at a young age, sharing car journeys with this person, and loses himself in naive bliss that this young love will last forever. Nights, where Frank reminisces on meeting and falling in love with someone in the first half of the track, before the second half reveals that the two met during Hurricane Katrina, where Frank's family were required to move. The hook expanding on friction between the two over Frank's lover wanted to spend time with him, but due to Frank's work commitments, he's unable to do so, revealing his stress at this scenario and simply wants to take all of his stress away through the means of marijuana. Self-Control, which sees Frank portraying himself in a more impulsive fashion, declaring his desire to have sex with some random person, freely admitting that he's following his impulses rather than analysing whether or not this act will mean anything in the long run. Pretty Sweet could be a possible reference to Frank's backlash in his past over him revealing his bisexuality. The album's opener, Nikes, where he critiques consumerism, materialism and hedonism, and links that to wanting a relationship with someone who is real rather than for the show. And the last track, Futura Free, where the core of the song focuses on Frank reflecting on how much his life has changed from when he first got signed to where he is now in his music career. Regarding instrumentation and production, the album is a very calm and composed album full of many stripped back and minimal moments, rarely presenting something that's aimed to blow the listener's hearing out. Some have gone on record to critique this album's instrumentals as being too laboured and not punchy enough. That opinion is valid in this case, but some of these moments don't necessarily hinder the project. The musty guitar line and chords along with the bass riff on Ivy give off the image of a live lounge performance that's very intimate and inviting. The gospel style keyboard along with the backing vocalists on Solo are particularly likeable, the Reprise opting for a more prominent piano instrumental with the switch up to a more hip hop beat in the middle, Nights with its very metallic string sounds and overall funk vibe going on along with the complete style change at the exact halfway point on the album in particular is simply a brilliant inclusion to the album. White Ferrari with its incredibly somber, minor synth tones drenched all over this track are rather beautiful. Siegfried with its washed out guitar piece with bouncy bass line before the strings and woodwind instruments come in during the latter half of the song. Godspeed again with its gospel theme, only this time opting for a synth guitar string introduction before transitioning into the electric keyboard and wavering synth line, and the final track, Futura Free, ends the album competently with these repeated piano chords and scratchy, murky background sounds, interweaving synth tones with a distorted electric guitar to boot. The album's low points, however, also appear quite often as well. The opening track, Nikes, with the manipulated chipmunk vocals are particularly distracting from what could have been a great track. Skyline 2 feels like it has no focus at all, sounding very much like a bunch of sounds just thrown into the mix and seeing what sticks and what doesn't, and that's the same story with Pretty Sweet, which is just a complete and utter mess of a track. Good Guy is basically unlistenable due to the filtered vocals. Once again, the same story is found on Close to You, another complete waste of time, and also the 2 skits on this album don't do anything for me. I'm not entirely sure what purpose they serve on the album overall. I'll admit that Facebook Story is somewhat intriguing, but why is it here? And with regards to Be Yourself, it just feels like a dime a dozen piece of motivational talk that you'll hear all of the time. Overall, I think I should like this album a lot more than I do, but unfortunately there are too many moments on this album that get on my nerves that I simply cannot ignore. To do so would be completely ignorant, and just because it's Frank Ocean, I'm not going to simply let them fly under the radar. I really don't like a lot of the pitch shifted vocal deliveries Frank offers up on this album, which can on occasions really spoil a track, i.e. Nikes and Good Guy, just as a couple of examples. Some of the much shorter tracks on the album feel very unfulfilling and either needed to be stretched out or left off of this project entirely. Some supposed guest features you wouldn't even notice were here unless you went out of your way to look for them. I mean, I barely noticed Beyonce or Kendrick Lamar on their respective tracks. The instrumentation can sometimes be very laboured or messy or unfocused, and on a production level there's often a lot of dead air that needs to be filled up. But on the whole, when the album is at its strongest on tracks such as both of the solo tracks, White Ferrari and Godspeed, just to name a few, then this album is highly enjoyable, and I cannot help but commend Frank for once again delivering some topics that are not as openly spoken about or mentioned in hip hop or R&B, and that he's continuing to bring down some of the walls in the process. It's not better than Channel Orange, but it's hardly disappointing either. Overall, I score this album a 73 out of 100.